Hey guys, welcome back to the Dimensions Woodworks Woodshop. Today we've got a really special project that I have had on the books for quite a while. And if you want to see how I turned a stack of old pallets into my tool wall, stick around. So I had quite a few pallets and some old broken down pallet boards hanging around the shop for quite some time, and it was time to make something out of them. I started by sorting the boards from size, width, and color, and then began to straighten one edge on the joiner. After having a straight reference edge, I took them to the table saw and cut them all down to the same width. Then I took them out to the planer to ensure that they were all exactly the same thickness. Then it was off to the miter saw to make sure that I had one perfectly square reference edge. I marked them so I would know which side to face in during glue up. I used a piece of underlayerment plywood and laid out a center line and then began installing the first boards for the pattern. I used wood glue for the heavy lifting, but I also used my hot glue gun in this process to make sure that when the boards were set, they did not move. Then I made sure to check the square every time I installed a new reference board, because every other board installed after this point will key off of those. Then I began the long, tedious process of the installation of the rest of the boards. I glued them both to the plywood and to each other from the edge to make sure I had a solid foundation for the tool wall. After first rotating around the tool wall one board at a time, I found that it went much more quickly installing all the boards in one area simultaneously. The key here was to not put two like boards next to each other. After the glue had time to cure overnight, I went back and rough cut the edges of the boards that were overhanging. I came back later with a flush trim bit to make sure I got the final pass exactly even with the edge of the plywood. Then, in an effort to further stabilize the tool wall, I used 2x4s around the perimeter, just joining them with pocket holes on the edges to join them to each other, and then I glued them to the back of the plywood. Then it was time to ensure that the entire surface of the tool wall was flush and flat. After that, I began on the construction of the lower cabinet that would house my hand planes. I built a rough frame, then used a pencil and a combination square to mark where the dados would be to accept thin sheets of plywood. I set my table saw blade to cut a 1/2 inch into all the pieces so that an even recess was left all the way around, making it so the plywood could slide in that groove. Then I cut the plywood to the proper length and width and began to install it. Now that the structure of the cabinet was done, it was time for the facade. I wanted a continuous look of this pallet wood pattern to go all the way around the tool wall and wrap itself around the cabinet. I started in every recess with a 45-degree angle on one end, and then would mark out where the next piece needed to be cut. Using a bevel gauge, I was able to find those angles relatively easily, and then it was time to install them. Making these pieces fit perfectly was like installing a very large puzzle. I made reference marks around the cabinet to have a point to start from to ensure that the pattern flowed around the box continuously. After the first piece was installed properly, it went pretty smoothly after that, and each one just fell into place. Then it was time to begin the construction of the doors. For this, I chose rough cut cedar because I wanted that ununiform look that went along with the rest of the build. I also used a new joinery method for these doors. Having never constructed doors like this, I was a little bit iffy at first, but they went together really well. I used dowels and a doweling jig in order to secure the end grain to the long grain of the other piece of wood, then glued them all together and set them in the clamps. For the profile on the outer perimeter of the doors, I just chose to use a chamfer. I thought it worked well with this rough cut look. Then I opted for European hinges to fit with the theme of making a seamless look around the cabinet. The next part was pretty tricky. I wanted to ensure that I did not interrupt the pattern from the rest of the cabinet to the doors. So I traced it out on large pieces of paper and then used carbon paper to transfer where those boards should be. I opted for a French cleat to hang the whole system on the wall so that it could be easily uninstalled and moved if needed in the future. Then it was time to start applying finish. I decided to go with Danish oil for this process in order to bring out the natural beauty of the wood, but not cover it up with stains or dyes. It always amazes me just how much these hand-rubbed oils bring out the natural grain in the wood. Then it was time to start building the tool holders. I used several variations of these depending on the tool and where I would like it located. I installed all the tool holders to the tool wall with 1.5-inch screws so that they could be moved at a later date as my tool collection grows or changes. I have had this pallet that originated at a John Deere factory for quite a while and was trying to figure out a good use for it, and I chose my chisel holder. I marked out the width and the length of the chisels, then created a dado with a router bit and finished the cutoff with the chisels themselves to make for a snug fit. I made sure to join the front and the back of the chisel holder only with screws so that those holes could be modified in the future. And I tried to place like tools in an area together on the tool wall to make it more efficient when actually being used for a build. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. And don't forget while you're here to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel so that you can be notified when we release new content. Until next time, remember to get better every day.